Welcome, Nancy. Thank you so much. And everyone. I am going to hand it off to Christina Brown Watts from Culture One World to do a brief intro remarks, but thank you all for joining today.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our call today. We are talking about activating social trends for vaccine uptake, where we share lessons in social storytelling. Our goal today is to provide useful recommendations on how to look at storytelling in the digital age and take lessons from what gains attention and traction to bring those to life, in the public health messaging space. The most effective stories reach the heads, hearts, and minds of communities on the margins through relevant formats, humor when it's appropriate, and culturally attuned content. Today, you will mainly hear from two of my awesome colleagues. Some of you may know Humberto Martinez, who is the Director of Social Listening and Digital Strategy. Also, Jen Cox, who is our lead researcher and cultural strategist. And again, my name is Christina Brown Watts, SVP Group Account Director at Culture One World. Speaking of our agency, I just want to give you guys a little bit of understanding for those of you who don't know us. We are an independent advertising agency based in DC, and we have a major focus on purpose-driven multicultural work. Some of our clients include Amtrak, BioLife, National Kidney Foundation, and of course, the CDC Foundation. We've worked with the PAVE program for the last 3 years, developing social media messaging specifically for the Black and African American communities. And it's been a pleasure to work with our subcontractor, CMR Ignite. They have been instrumental in developing all of the assets that you guys receive on the Vaccine Resource Hub to help with your social media efforts. In addition to the creative assets, we are also responsible for mapping out the vaccine uptake rates and aligning those to the misinformation that we see in certain areas that plague the Black communities. We also do social listening. We've also done social listening as well as strategy to make sure that we're delivering the right messages at the right time, given how the ebb and flow of the COVID pandemic has been, as we all know, and as well to make sure that those are relevant to the Black community. Right now, I would love to turn it over to Jen, who will talk you through the storytelling trends that we see and how we can apply them.
Hi, thank you, Christina. It's so nice to have everybody here in this conversation. It's storytelling, right? So let's dive in. And I want to kick off our conversation today with a popcorn eating, pearl clutching worthy story that recently took the internet and the world by storm, which is the Risa Tisa saga. I'm sure that you have heard about this, but if not, I know you're probably going to Google it right now. But over the course of several days, she posted a total of 52 separate 10-minute videos, a masterclass in storytelling, unraveling how she ended up dating and then marrying and then ultimately divorcing a gentleman that she claims lied about pretty much everything in his personal life. And what's really amazing about this one woman's personal story is that it garnered more than 400 million views online. And it was so compelling that it reached audiences across generations. And I just want to play a really short clip for you to give you a sense of both what the story was about and how the media and the world responded to it. Maybe I want to play a clip. There we go. Uh-oh, I think we need
One question. She had the internet hooked.
Who did I marry?
In her 50-part TikTok series, Teresa Johnson, now widely known on social media as Risa Tisa, details her whirlwind pandemic romance that she says was filled with love, heartbreak, and alleged deception.
I'm going to tell the story of how I met, dated, married, and divorced a real pathological liar.
The viral saga has garnered more than 400 million views and counting.
Were you nervous at all about sharing?
Yes, I was nervous, but ultimately I decided if you're going to tell this story, tell the whole story. I also really truly believe the story will help somebody. It costs you nothing to verify, but it very well may cost you everything to not verify.
The narrative spread out over an 8-hour playlist.
Okay, thank you. Ooh. Thank you. So what's key about that? And the reason why we pulled that as the first slide to share is that's a special kind of storytelling, but it just speaks to the power of stories versus messages going out into the market and making people engage, wanting to reshare and 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 take something away, I guess, from the story. The overarching takeaway here, the key takeaway, is that Risa Tisa used her personal story, warts and all, to evoke feelings, right? It could be sympathy, it could be incredulity, it could be outrage, whatever it was. She did this in such a powerful way that it prompted people to do exactly what we want them to do with the stories that we tell around public health out in the marketplace, to examine their own personal histories at the same time, to engage and to inform others about these stories. And so not only is the story, personal and, I'll be honest with you, it's scintillating, right? But it touches on a theme that's really important to the culture. And if you could go to the next slide, if you don't mind. And we're going to talk about a lot of these themes as we go forward. But this image of the Black man that I have with his fish here is from another story that touched a nerve in the community, where 3 times in one day, Anthony Gibson, who was this fisherman, was asked by a white person in his neighborhood what he was doing in his own neighborhood. And like Risa Tisa, his story was first shared online, covered by major news outlets, ultimately like NBC and CNN and the New York Times. But what we take from both of these are both the personal connection and kind of a response to something that is relevant to the culture that everybody has had this kind of experience with that they can extrapolate from. And it's a really good jumping off point because I want to turn it over to Umberto to talk about how we extrapolate the nuggets. What do we find that the connective tissue in these stories that can be used and leveraged to make our messages and our stories more powerful in this space?
Thank you, Jen. And with that, I'm going to pull up this wonderful quote that everyone loves from the iconic and singular Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. In reality, to me, this quote, it's a bit of a shock to me that it is so contemporary, so recent, because of how poignant and understandable and relatable it is. Storytelling is literally the origin of human history. If we didn't have these stories, there wouldn't be history, right? And we all know that stories aren't really interesting if they don't make you feel away, which in reality is the core idea of what we want to look at today for how to tap into some of these social trends that we observe all the time. Right, so how does that translate to our work with vaccines and public health? Well, every day we're bombarded with content these days, right? Now, there's so many platforms, they've reached a certain level of maturity. A lot of it is very intentional and very well produced. Some of it, whether it has shiny graphics or filmed with a really good camera, the editing is on point. Someone young with the newest app knows what they're doing. And everyone's probably trying to be funny these days. It just becomes a lot harder to capture people's attention. So which is the first step in delivering a message, capturing their attention, right? So anytime we like something, comment on a post, or even just linger on a photo or video, we're engaging with it. Maybe it made us feel warm or curious or excited. Maybe it was that it was concerning or invoked fear. You're worried that it might be something that happens to you or to a loved one. Maybe it upset you. Or maybe the post itself didn't do any of those things. You're just watching the responses in the comments or the replies, and that's what's making you get upset, the way other people are reacting to it. You're finding that you're not reacting in the same way as they are, and you're very confused or surprised by that. All of these things are rooted in emotion, right? So when we're writing a post for social media, we are all naturally, whether it's on our personal pages or we're writing it with a little bit more intention for a community page or a brand page or whatever it may be, we are all naturally trying to tap into these emotions, whether we think about it or not. The difference maybe that we want to bring to you today is doing it a little bit more in a systematic way and breaking down some of these larger, more successful in a way, successful in the sense that they've taken off in with views or impressions or replies, engagement, and take what we can learn from those in crafting some public health messages. So we'll start by talking about kind of there's many approaches to do this, right? But we'll start with one for analyzing some of these viral stories on the internet that we see all the time. This is, because they are often so unique, sometimes you have to take different approaches, but this one is kind of a general approach we can take for public health. So starting at the beginning, deconstructing the meme or the story, right? So you want to pull away from it, whether it's Reesa Teesa talking about her husband and it's just a kind of a relatable, if not ridiculous or absurd or preposterous, whatever you want to describe it, however you want to describe it, the story, whatever is being told, and something that would never happen to you. There are elements there that are relatable, which are the parts that bring you in, right? So it's a wife and a husband. And so if you take the story and you deconstruct it and you consider who are the characters and what are the emotions they are going through, are they emotions that a person can imagine themselves in? Are they emotions that people have felt before and don't ever want to feel again or want to feel them again, love those feelings? You're just kind of taking a stock of what is happening in whatever the viral story is. And then finding those intersections, right? Does the story, and again, it's like when you're looking at those emotions, does it represent a common situation or a way of thinking that resonates with people? What are the factors here that are making it interesting, that are causing emotion? What are the emotions, where they come from? What are the real life parts of them that show up for us? And finally, of course, a much easier approach too is knowing whether it is effective within a particular community. If you can break it down, a lot of times we want to do one thing, one simple thing, one easy thing. Here's one trick to get the success that you need. But in reality, our society, our cultures are not a monolith. There's many different, it could be actually similar culture from maybe from a racial sense, but completely different because of a of a geographic sense. So you have to think about, like, is it resonating in a particular area? And that way you can understand why the story is working. And then finally, once you kind of have all those things taken stock and kind of looked at it critically, analytically, you can start thinking about how you might be able to deliver your message using the same techniques or things that you have learned from the story at the very least, maybe using the same visual language, using some of the same words. And of course, anybody who works in marketing, when anybody asks you if you can make something go viral, it is a very cringe moment. So we're not suggesting that you could reach the same amount of success or do their stories. Whatever your message is going to be is obviously going to be very different. So that's why instead of saying we're reflecting, we're refracting or diffracting here. As you can see, this is kind of like a little rainbow that was there, but on the reflection, it's diffused. It's not the same. It's not as strong. It's not the same.
Oh, sorry. I went mute for a moment. So I want to take us a step back. So, emotions, feelings, stories, this is such an important way to think about reaching out into the communities that we're trying to reach. But the question is, how do you know? How do you know what's going on, what's important, what kind of story is going to work? And so for us, all of this work starts with understanding the key themes, the key ideas, the currents that are being discussed in these communities in order to look for then stories related to them. So as Humberto and Christina both talked about kind of the work that we do a lot of social listening. And we supplement that by paying attention offline to look for points of inflection in the culture, understand both what's being talked about and how we feel about it. And so for our recent work with CDCF, we kind of bucketed our themes, or they naturally kind of sorted themselves in these categories that we could start with in order to figure out what are the stories related to each one of those themes and how do we make them work for our work. So the first is this idea about reclaiming space. And here I don't mean like physically, occupying a space, but really thinking about what happens in conversation, like how do you hold space in a room, or how do you hold space in a digital platform? What does it look like to take back the language, the narratives, and even, things like visibility, so that in this way, both the narrator, the subject is both the narrator and the subject of the story at the same time, just like we saw in Risa Tisa. Another important theme is economic empowerment. And we looked at this from kind of a broader lens than just economic to think about what empowerment means in general. And what we saw was this idea, the conversations here were really about working outside of systems designed to keep us outside, really. How do we work around them to define success on our own terms? I think some of the stories that we saw here were really around what we saw on TikTok, where Black creators are doing stories about here's your side hustle that nobody will tell you about, or the call center lady on TikTok. I have some examples to share with you down the line here. And these last two, collective action and community building, were themes too that really resonated, but the only difference is that they seem to be kind of evergreen and are maybe foundational to everything that we will see as we do this work. So for collective action, it's this idea about, having a call to action, coming together to fix things that are wrong, or to shine a light on the fact that there's this kind of disparity. The other side of that collective action, which is also an evergreen theme or area to be in, is the idea of community building. So that while we celebrate, the success of individuals, we root for each other to win. A lot of that is couched in this idea about sharing resources across the community, so that each one of us, the success of one accrues because we share that knowledge and use it to build the community up together. And so I want to go to the next slide here and talk a little bit about, when we think about what these themes mean, just dive in a little bit to each one of them and give you some examples. So the first one, as I said, was reclaiming space. And when we were looking for content online or conversations online to illustrate this trend, we saw a lot about fashion. It's always a big topic of conversation online. And something that we noticed recently popping up in stories here was the increasing number of Black girls and women who are reclaiming their space as innovators and drivers of fashion culture. So one example that we loved was when at the beginning of the pandemic, so it's a little bit, but it's grown since then, the Aaliyah Core movement was born. And this is a trend created by a woman named Aaliyah Ba. Her handle is Aaliyah's Interlude on social media. And she's a 20-year-old influencer. She's based in Atlanta. And she does a lot of content around those get ready with me videos on TikTok. She's got over 2.5 million followers, I think, at this point. And what she does is she really talks about her style, which is a mix of kind of Y2K fashion and Japanese inspired streetwear, but she remixes that in this wholly Black driven space. So taking from what has been taken from her back, really, and remixing it in a new way that's engaging, that includes the diaspora in the conversation, is really what the lessons kind of we take away from this story, that we lean into celebrating the culture, we point out what we can and are already doing, and tell stories from our own perspective, from within the community, reaching out to that community and beyond in ways that invite the whole of the diaspora into the conversation. And I'm going to let Umberto talk to you a little bit about how we take those lessons and how you can see them brought to life in the creative that we did around this idea about reclaiming space.
For sure. Thank you, Jen. Well, we could have picked hundreds of examples to show today for the themes that we're going to go through. Some of them may be better than the ones that we show, but we are focusing on work that we produced on our team for PAVE. That way, we can speak a little bit more deeply to the intentions and process that we went through, and also so we make it a little bit more tangible and practical for you all, as these are all available to download on the Vaccine Resource Hub and with the resources that we had available as part of this team. So I'll start when talking about reclaiming space here in the lower right. This is actually from earlier, probably year one. I believe it's from our first year working on PAVE. And at the time, one of the things we were hearing in social listening was about government overreach, that the restrictions. I mean, and we all know, everyone probably on this call. I mean, whether you worked on PAVE or not, you have a very strong understanding of how people felt about wearing a mask or having to have a vaccine passport, or any of these other restrictions that were presenting themselves in different ways in different states, depending on the situation. But there were a lot of memes online, things that were making light of a situation. They were taking a difficult or awkward situation and making it funny, right? So here we have in the image that we selected kind of the guy that we were seeing in those memes. Maybe it's the person behind some of those memes even. But they're kind of having this like visceral reaction, and that in itself is grabbing your attention. It's kind of making you feel away, and you read the text and you think, yes, exactly. I don't even want to think or talk about that. Maybe whether you're on this side of wearing a mask or that one, it's too much. I don't want to get into an argument about it. And so that's how we start. That's how we capture their attention here, and then we move on to the message. Yes, that's how we all feel about it. But you'd be a lot worse if you got COVID, right? Just get your vaccine. There's a frame missing here just for the sake of fitting on the page. So that message continued. Up here in the upper left, we have another one. This was for one of our Black History Month batches of posts that we created. For this one, we had kind of a difficult prompt, right? It was like how to challenge government mistrust in the Black community, for the government and healthcare system mistrust in the Black community, especially, considering some of the historic missteps with medical experiments and other things. And it's a very challenging question. There's no one that can solve it with a social media post, of course, right? But what we wanted to do is highlight how, as much as there are historic moments that are very important and to be considered, these days, and particularly with the vaccine, there are plenty of Black doctors and scientists who have contributed to the work, were supportive of the work, did all these things. And so we have that message here kind of in the third frame, but also throughout it all, we showed how, Black people have been part of the government and done part of these scientific advancements in general. So we're all in this together. That's where we kind of escape from collective action, maybe, and are more in the reclaiming space side of things. We have some superhero visuals. We have a reference to Hidden Figures, and we have the colors of the Pan-African flag as well. Down below, a little bit more simpler approach. This is a more recent one. We're not talking about any of these like awkward or kind of negative feelings, and we're moving into a positivity, right? So we have a photo of a family, and it's expressing a lot of joy, a lot of positivity. So it's about supporting positivity by getting the vaccine rather than addressing something negative that everyone is maybe experiencing.
Perfect. Thank you. And our second theme here, as I mentioned at the very beginning, when we think about this idea about economic empowerment, all these conversations that we heard, we really leaned into the second half of that phrase, which was empowerment. And the conversations then that matter aren't the ones that matter most aren't really around, changing systems or, fighting for equality and things like home ownership. But here, because we lean so heavily into the empowerment part of this, we see the culture coming together to identify opportunities for individuals to make their entrepreneurship dreams come true. Frankly, just live a life where they can bring their passions to bear on what their work life looks like. And there are myriad conversations in Black spaces online about things like turning a side hustle into a business, finding unexpected or surprising and delightful opportunities. And there's a sentiment here that I think was really interesting about this need to know someone or have an in, right, to get after these kind of quote unquote secret opportunities. But it was a different way to approach it because it's surprisingly not about exclusivity or gatekeeping. In fact, it works the exact opposite way. It's about this idea that you don't necessarily need to have an in, or you don't necessarily need to know someone if you're of the community, because this is us doing for us, keeping it within the community, if you will. And so one of the examples that again started at the beginning of the pandemic, much like the first one I shared, was the hashtag Shop Black. And it took off like gangbusters at the beginning of the pandemic. But, you know, sadly, but not surprisingly, fell off in popularity as time went on. What we're seeing now in more current conversations is this idea in different iterations, like this one that local is the new Black. And so here's where that idea about individual, in this case, small business owners, their success being partly due to support from within the community, but that they also offer opportunities for that community too to learn how they did it. So this idea about supporting each other and our goals and aspirations is really a big part of this. And so what we took away from this idea was stories here that work are about ones that show opportunities to flip the script, as I said, working outside or around systems, stories that focus on inherent strengths as opposed to let me help you learn this, right? You're strong enough to figure this out yourself with a little bit of insider baseball information, maybe, and celebrating this kind of striving spirit. And Umberto will take you through a little bit about how we took those lessons and applied those from this empowerment idea into our creative work.
So for economic empowerment, we're actually going to start with one that's less on the economic side, but on the empowerment side, because our entire strategic imperative on our side was less about the economic side, which we're discussing in this deck because it's appeals on a larger level. But for us, in our paid work, the strategic directive was empathetic empowerment always throughout all of the work that we did. So this first one is an example of that because it's a carousel or series of Instagram stories that came out in last year at a time when Roe v. Wade was being decided or discussed very thoroughly. It seemed very, I guess there were a lot of online conversations that were a bit grim. Seemed there were women who felt like they had their choices and power were being taken away. And we obviously weren't going to touch on abortion, right? That wasn't in our realm, and obviously for many reasons. But we saw an opportunity in the conversations about women's choice. And for the vaccines, it's always been about choice and self-empowerment. So that's where this carousel comes in. I think it speaks for itself a little bit. Your choices make the difference. One very important choice you can make today is to stay protected from the latest COVID variants. The improved boosters are the best line of defense for you and your family. And again, this is from last year. I know our language is a little bit different with the updated boosters. But it speaks to that. It's the idea of the empowerment, returning control to people's hands. And in most cases, it's more on the economic side as a theme. It's probably a bigger theme on the whole, but empowerment in general is a running theme within this community. Down below in the lower right, we have some that are a little bit more economic focused. I think it's pretty obvious. It's the new variants one has a direct appeal to common sense or logic, right? It's if you get sick, that means sick days, and sick days mean lost wages, especially if you're an hourly worker at least. So if there are new variants, you need to get the new vaccine because you don't want to lose those wages, right? So it's just an appeal to that common sense and that logic. In the lower right, we have one, the prompt was a little bit more focused against misinformation online that because COVID was becoming just like the flu in more of the endemic stage, that you no longer needed to worry about getting the latest vaccine or a vaccine and the vaccine against it in general. And it's like, that's not true. Just like the flu, you need a new one every year. Just like that, COVID keeps changing and you need to keep up with it.
Okay, our next theme here, as I mentioned at the very beginning, this one, collective action, and the next are kind of these evergreen themes in the culture. But the idea here is that we see collective action as a theme where the stories that come out of that are both the tools that we use to make the change. So you tell the story and somebody hears it and change is made, but they're also at the same time a call to action for others to join in and to become a part of the story. So it's kind of the cyclical thing. So it's a tool, it's a call to action, more people make that tool stronger. And when you think about stories in that way, stories as tools means that we're telling them to elevate the conversation, to shine a light on a discord, disparity, disconnection, whatever it might be. It's this kind of emotional pull that can change people's perception. And the calls to action, when stories are calls to action, they're still tools, but in a different way. They galvanize our cohorts, our communities to kind of join in the fight together and work in solidarity to make that kind of change. And we only need to look back here at kind of the high profile and sadly tragic examples of the cases of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, those things that continue to be resonant in different ways, though, for the Black community than they are for other communities, that serve as that kind of a moment in time around which a story is built that becomes the galvanizing force for a community. They also show the power in a much different way of one individual's impact, a much different way than Risa Tisa, for instance. The power of one individual's impact, one voice raised, when multiplied because it's told in a story that invites others to learn and to do. And so here, like the biggest takeaway was that, Umberto mentioned earlier in the slide presentation, this idea that we are not, Black community doesn't exist as a monolith, right? And so this in collective action is interesting because that the collective starts with us highlighting in these stories, the power of the individual to be a force for change, bolstered by the support of the collective. And you'll see what that looks like in the creative work that we have to share with you around this for COVID.
So obviously for collective action for this theme, it can get pretty political, right? So it's a little bit moving away from maybe the original stories and stuff we were seeing, obviously, over the years between 2016, 2020, 2021. There's no way we're going to approach some of those, but we can use some of the visual language and speak to, again, the deconstructed story, speaking to what maybe is the ethos behind it all, right? In our main example here, this IG story carousel, when the going gets tough, we always rise up, especially when it comes to keeping each other protected from COVID. Sometimes we all feel like we've had enough with the vaccines and boosters, but COVID's not quitting, so neither can we. Stay tough, get boosted. What are we seeing here? We're seeing the colors of the Pan-African flag. We're seeing some strong images of members of the community, particularly maybe feminist coded. We are seeing two people at different life stages. Maybe that's a grandpa putting on a mask on their grandchild because they're protecting their family. So there's this kind of feeling of coming together, right? As we kind of see in another one of the themes, but more importantly, it's about the push. It's not just about coming together, it's about the push, right? You have it in you, you know it is in you. It's kind of like it's like when you're watching a movie and kind of the little epic music is playing and you're getting kind of a feeling inside of you. It's that exactly kind of what we were going with in that sense here. Obviously, when it comes to political stuff, depending on how it rings, you have to be a little bit careful in navigating that space because it might there might be something you're not considering that you're messaging, and it's like you where you're coming from or what you're saying should not be taking over this this pathway, right? This communication pathway. So very much trying to be respectful of that in all of our work, of course. But here in the lower right, again, there's a lot of visual language, the words, committed to progress, unified by resilience, stay healthy, get vaccinated against COVID. And in the image, this is relatively simple, but in the image itself, we see people again enjoy. So this is one of the more recent ones. We're supporting positivity rather than coming directly for maybe a negative topic in the COVID vaccine space. They're young, the way they're dressed. Maybe there's an appeal here with Gen Z or maybe an LGBT crowd with just the image that we're using. So that kind of is some of the examples we have for collective action.
That's great. Thank you. We're on to our last one. You've made it this far. So this is another one that is kind of an evergreen, foundational principle or foundational idea that we see talked about a lot online, and that there are stories generated around this online that are kind of maybe nuanced differently over time, but it's always part of the storytelling conversation. A great example here is from a TikTok user named Khalil Green. He is called the Gen Z historian, and he has about 500,000 followers, and he uses his platform to tell stories that are both for and about the Black community, about our history, about the joy we should feel about being part of this rich history, and kind of inviting people to learn more about themselves and their kind of place in this rich community. What we take away from Khalil, and there's other online storytellers in this community building space, but from him, it's this idea that it's okay to bring some joy and celebration, even into stories, even when the stories themselves are kind of difficult or might be challenging to kind of sit through. The stories that matter here are the ones that have that kind of impact, are ones that are often those that are kind of just for us. There's this idea that it's kind of like, if you know, right? It's not going to garner a lot of eyeballs that maybe are not necessarily allies or already a part of the Black community, but it's coded in a way, his stories are coded in a way that make it clear that he's talking to us, for us, because he loves us. And there's some opportunities in here for levity and joy in the message that I think you'll also see in the creative work that Umberto will take you through.
For sure. And again, there are hundreds, thousands, maybe examples that we could have used, but we want to highlight for you here two of our holiday posts. I think because it's kind of a unique situation, these are two separate years, I believe. So we have some distinct approaches here on kind of the same thing. In particular, we'll start with the left. The gift you give to everyone. When you get your updated COVID vaccine, it's not just for you. Stay updated, stay healthy. So we have here the image of a family. You have a mom and dad with their child and what looks to be their grandparents. So people at different life stages, 3 different life stages here. And they all matter when it comes to the COVID vaccine. So we all know coming together for a holidays, it's all about coming together. But a lot of online conversations are about what are you getting for your loved ones? What are you hoping to receive? Maybe these are some of the, there is a certain amount of escapism in the holidays, right? Not only are you coming to be with your family, but also maybe you're using some of your free time to think about what you might want or what you can get. It's kind of a pastime almost for some people. So in this sense, we're bringing it back. It's like, actually, you don't need the material things. The gift you need to give is health for your family. Like, bring it together, make sure that when you go visit your grandma or your auntie, like, you're not going to get them sick and they're not going to the hospital. So it's kind of a powerful message done in a simple way. On the right, we have it's cuffing season. Getting the improved COVID booster keeps you protected against the latest variants. Stay healthy this winter. You owe it to your future bae. Let's get real about COVID. So in this one, this is very much an attention grabber, at least for me, because we see this older couple in a particular life stage, very obvious life stage. But we're using language from another online trend where people are usually talk about cuffing season in the fall. But it's kind of weird because usually you might see or associate or connotate something like cuffing season, if you know what it is, with maybe somebody much younger, much sexier, of a certain image. But we have here a very wholesome older couple that seems very happy to be with each other and very happy to see each other, and they're keeping warm, and they're keeping themselves nice and warm and cozy. And then as a contrast on the other side, we have a much younger couple. Again, still a very wholesome image, but it gives you a different feel. And so maybe the first one caught your attention, but the third frame you related to, or vice versa, right? But I think there's a couple of approaches there for not only getting your attention, but finding relatability.
I will say, I want to do like a little quick recap here for us, because this has been a lot of us talking and a lot of, here's a big idea, here's how it might be applied. I do want to note that somebody put a funny comment in the chat that the cuffing season image was making them crack up. Me too, every time I see it. But one of the things I want to make sure that it's clear here is, before I go on to kind of do this recap, is that there are more than the 4 themes that we identified. There's way more conversations going on. There's numerous things happening in online conversations in the Black community. These are ones that we pulled that we thought were really had some legs and could be kind of reframed to work in the public health space. I will say that it's important to note that they don't exist in silos. So you can't just say like, I'm just going to talk about reclaiming space because there might be some aspect of community building in there. Or I'm just going to talk about collective action because there might be some aspect of empowerment in there. There's a little bit of bleed that goes across, and that's absolutely fine. The idea is to figure out what the themes are, lead with one, and figure out what that looks like, whether or not others come in to support it. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. There's nothing wrong with it if they do. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear before I take us back to the very beginning of the presentation, where Umberto was giving us some kind of step-by-step, like, these are the things you do to figure out how, from what you hear, the conversations you're privy to, those you engage with online, to pull out stories from those that might work. The first is this idea about deconstruction, that we're listening to these conversations online, and anybody can do this. Go on your own TikTok. Don't pretend you don't, because I know I wasn't the only one who watched Risa Tisa more than once. You go online, listen to these conversations that come from the communities, and tease out those themes. Umberto talked about who's the protagonist, who's the evil character in it, what's like the major critical point that's coming out of it. Those are the things you tease out and figure, like, put these to the side and figure out if there's a way for those to be components, or the ideas behind them to be components in my own storytelling online. That we find the intersections. And here I think it's really important to add to what Umberto said at the very beginning, which is, the first thing is we have to get over this idea about telling people what we want to say, right? They don't care about what we want to say. They care about what they want to hear. So leaning into kind of less us forward and more kind of you forward messaging. So if we know what people like, we know what people are engaged with, instead of saying like, but you need to get a vaccine, we say, and do you know how a vaccine can help you? Or yes, and, right? It's not just about drumming out the message. And I know that it's highly unlikely that any one of us on this call is going to put out a 50 post long series. We can think about the long form story. I think that's an interesting idea. But if we have to encapsulate that long form story into just a chapter in a story and act accordingly, we take that redirection from the characters that we know, from what we know our community wants to hear, and then figure out ways in this last phase to kind of redirect that and maybe it's the prologue to the story, or maybe it's chapter 1 to the story. It doesn't have to be this kind of long thing that happens, but with one good post or one good carousel, that kind of excitement, that emotion that we talked about, we want to build, those feelings that we want to evoke in people, can happen if we do all this work at the beginning before we get to the creation of that post. So that was a lot of us talking. Before I open it up to Q&A, if you have any, I want to turn it back to Christina for a quick call for your input.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Jen. Such a great presentation, and I hope you all enjoyed it as well as pulled really great insights and action items that you can apply to your own work that you do as well. And, you know, as a reminder, you do have access to the creative that you saw. All 3 years of the creative that we've developed for the program is still available on the Vaccine Resource Hub. What we would like to do is ask, based on that creative and your utilization of that creative, or even interest in utilizing that creative, we would like for you to fill out a survey for us. It is a very short survey. It's like maybe 2-3 minutes, maybe max. We don't ask a whole lot of questions, but they are related to how the social media creative that we've developed is resonant to your communities and has maybe even performed in your previous work utilizing those assets. Don't be afraid if you have not utilized our assets before. You can still fill out the survey because it does ask about how it may resonate with your particular organization's community. So Eric has put the link in the chat. Thank you so much. And it will close on May 3rd. We may extend that, but we do ask if you could fill out that survey. This is not for research, but it allows us to understand ways in which you may utilize the assets and if you are finding benefit. We've gotten a lot of great anecdotal feedback, but never actually sat down and try to do an actual survey. So again, we appreciate your input in advance. And all right, I think that is our show. We'd love to answer any questions that you may have, which you can put in the chat or ask us live.
Nobody wants to be the first.
Well, while we wait to see if we have any questions, I want to clarify with Jen that I did not assign evil to anyone.
Fair enough.
I am team Risa Tisa, but I didn't assign people roles.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think you said who were the characters. I decided to say protagonist or evil villain.
Well, since we don't have any questions so far, we will turn it back over to Eric so we can close out this presentation. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Christina, Jennifer, Umberto, thank you all so much for taking the time to present today. I'm going to launch a very quick satisfaction poll, just one question. If you all could take the chance to fill that out, I appreciate it. While you are doing that, I have an event that I'd like to plug. It is called Winning New Funding to Sustain Your Health Equity Work. Will be taking place next week on the 25th. Here is a link if you would like to take a better look at that. It's next week at 3 p.m., I believe. Just double checking that. Yes, 3 p.m. to 3:45. This session will explore strategies for securing new funding to continue or to expand your health equity work. Laura Durda, Program Officer for the CDC Foundation, will introduce new funding opportunities feature of the Vaccine Resource Hub. And that will be followed by a panel discussion that will showcase 3 PAVE funded organizations who are going to share some advice about their own experiences winning and developing proposals. And with that, thank you all so much for attending today. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone.